Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Hourlings podcast project. My name is Martin Wilsey, and tonight we're going to be talking about romance. You know, it's really weird. When I started researching the topic for this week, I found that it is a ginormous topic. So we're going to try to prune the edges off enough to keep it for one episode, because you would not believe how many podcasts there are that are only about romance writing. So I try to distill it down as well as I could. Before we get started, let's just go around. Do you guys include romance in your writing?
I plan to.
My novel with St. Martin's Press is technically categorized as a romance. Yeah. I think it's a lot more. I think there's a lot more going on. But it's a YA contemporary romance. So absolutely, I have is my answer.
So kinda, sorta. I have a futuristic detective noir type story where there is theoretically going to be a romance between at least the beginnings of a romance between the detective and the client. And I have the underpinnings in the novella version of the story that was published in an anthology. But I really haven't brought the romance out the way the story needs. And it turns out that's one of my weak points. So maybe I'll learn something from this podcast.
Sounds good.
Yeah, in my first novel, which turned into a trilogy, it's really funny. If you talk to my wife, she cracks me up. She finished reading the last book, and she pointed at me. She goes, "This isn't a science fiction novel. This is a romance with a little camouflage on top," because it does have an epic romance in there. But that alone makes me, during my research, want to come up with the different kinds of romance that there are.
Well, actually,
And the biggest differentiator is there are novels that have romance in them, and then there are romance novels.
Right. And then there are
when the plot is about the romance is a completely different ball game than if you're writing science fiction or any other genre.
Yeah.
And it includes a romance, even if it's a romance between protagonists. If the main plot is not about that romance, if the climax isn't when the couple get together, pun intended, and then it is not a real romance or whatever.
Right.
In fact, some romances have very strict formulas. My wife was telling me that Harlequin novels, for instance, they have very, very strict, like
chapter 1 has to have, chapter 3 has to have, chapter 5 has to have.
That's cool. That's if you are expecting to get this and you don't get it, you'd be
it's like cozy mysteries.
Disappointed. She was also telling me about another kind of romance novel that she didn't know what it's technically called, but it's tourism romances, where the entire book is like a travel guide about Paris.
Yeah.
Going all these real places and romantic scenes that are happening in real restaurants and real fountains and stuff. I find that to be very interesting to do too.
I should write a novel in Hallstatt. I've been there a few times.
So do you guys read romances?
I plan to. They're on my reading list.
I read
you don't read anything. I'm not asking you.
Well,
I read mostly YA, and YA always has romance. YA,
right? It's YA romance, big. That's a really big.
Yeah, it's great, and it's what inspired me to include strong romantic subplots in every. My one that was with St. Martin's was a romance officially, but all my other work, which is dozens of manuscripts in sci-fi, fantasy, YA, all have very strong subplots of romance.
Right. And I think it's important to realize that even when you talk about the pure romance, a novel that is the primary plot is romance, there can be, don't just pick up any romance novel. Some romance novels are not the romance novel that you want to give to your mother, although you never know.
Right. That I have a list of different types. I came up with a large category list. Maybe
You're
it's a
talking
good
about
time
heat
to
level.
talk about them. What's that?
Jeffrey's talking about the heat level.
The heat
Yes,
level.
exactly.
Romance is
Heat
rated
level.
according
And
to heat level.
erotic romance is
Yeah,
one of those
it's a
levels.
thing. It's a thing.
And
it does sell.
you know, there's a lot of that.
Oh yeah.
You know,
But I think you're missing.
there's a lot of gauges associated with romances, and
Mhm.
how erotic it is only one gauge.
You know, I will say that I thought I heard you say gauges, and there is such a thing as gay romance.
Oh
Don't get us
yeah,
wrong. You
and
can
in
write
fact
that too.
today there's a lot of atypical romance novels. Everything from 50 Shades of Grey to
Right.
you know,
BSDM.
And
Furry,
I would argue,
yeah, furry
I would
romance.
argue that gay romance should just be called romance.
yes.
In my
It
opinion.
is.
But the thing is
It is.
that the character types can be anybody, really.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah. It could
uh,
just be
I
two
actually
people that
consider
love
it
each
kind
other.
of
That's
healthy.
all it is.
Because I think there were a lot of markets that were really underserved for a long time.
Mhm. I mean, there has always been for male homosexuals. There's always been romance for them, but it's always been underground. It's always been hard to. But now you might be able to find it in the main bookshelf.
Are you trying to say that there was like LGBTQ literature for men, but not women so much in the past?
Well, the women had their literature too. I mean, and certainly there are sapphic stuff that has been published. In fact, they would have been found in the same place, but it was always underground. And I will be honest that the sapphic stuff probably sold
well,
in a more general sense anyway.
to get back on topic, and I don't want it to be all
Yeah.
about erotic romance.
I do.
No,
It can be a lot of fun. You know, find a good one. But I came up with an actual list. Contemporary romance, which is
Yeah.
modern day, you know,
Mhm.
straight up drama today
Mhm.
romance. Historical romance, very, very popular still. I mean,
Mhm.
movies and
Oh.
television and
Yeah.
and books.
The Outlander.
Very popular. Suspense romances.
Yeah.
Now, all of these these are the genres that often contain romances that are not strictly romances, if I'm making sense there.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because there's like paranormal romance is really big right now. You know, the genre itself, subgenre within science fiction or speculative fiction, or it's, you know, becoming its own genre or whatever. Very big right now, as well as YA. I also found in my research that there's subcategories of romance depending on the age of the people within the story.
Mhm.
All the way from YA to, you know,
Seniors.
old, you know,
Yeah.
geezer romance.
There is senior romance, definitely.
Yeah, it's all popular.
In fact, my first published story, it wasn't the topic of it, but I put intentionally, I put a senior citizen who had a nice little romantic relationship with one of his other lady friends, you know, and it was fun to do that. I do like romance. I do like to put, you know, love in my stories. Now, I will admit that Project Chronosphere, my main protagonist, Kevin, he's dealing with way too much to worry about girls. But I will say that, you know, that Hawks D2, a love story, was literally a love story. I had, you know, a guy on a train meeting a woman. You know, so I do like putting a little bit of love in my stories. And one other thing that I will say is the meet cute. I love the meet cute.
Meet cute. For those who don't know what the meet cute is, it's like, you know, they ran into each other on the sidewalk and both fell down and dropped all their papers, and then they had to pick them up together. You know, something like really.
And there's an initial antagonism that grows to. Sorry.
It's something you see in romantic comedies.
Rom-coms.
Yep. Absolutely. Rom-coms. They start antagonistic and then they become romantic.
Oh yeah. So first they hate each other and they just, you know, he's so arrogant and she's so businessy. It's a Hallmark movie.
That's a Hallmark movie. Yes.
Yeah.
Like,
It's a formula.
My wife loves those.
It's the woman who's the CEO and can't think of anything but business.
Right.
And then goes to this small town and meets the man who grills outside and knows all the neighbors and everything.
He's a really
It's
good carpenter.
All that. Yes, a carpenter. Yes,
Yeah.
wearing flannel. It's amazing.
I saw that movie.
I'm sure you have.
So Marty, is the heat level done with little images of peppers? Is that how they do it?
It depends who's doing it. Associating food with romance, that could be interesting.
Yeah. No, I don't think
I wanted to make a point. One of my novels that I wrote, Virtues of the Vicious, I actually challenged myself because the protagonist in it was a woman. And I challenged myself to not have a romance with the protagonist in any way. I didn't want her to rely on a man for, to rescue her or anything. And I got really excellent feedback and sales because of that. Now, the book did have a romance in it with the secondary character, some of the secondary characters. And that worked out really, really super well for that book.
Well, I think that can add some realism to your story too.
Yeah.
In that it's not all about a main character and the world revolves around them. Hey, there are secondary characters that you like, and they're having a life too.
It passes the Bechdel test. That's the thing. A woman who only talks about relationships, that's not passing the Bechdel test. Now, in your romance, maybe she's going to, because that's what the reader wants.
So there was a husband and wife writing team. I think they wrote under Del Shannon, detective stories. But half of the fun in the detective stories, I know my mom used to love those books when they came out, was not so much the individual crime or mystery they solved in each one. It was the ongoing lives of all the characters in the police station and how they interacted and bounced off of each other over the course of 20 or 30 books.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
romance can matter for stuff like that.
Absolutely. And your character's personalities are going to be very, very important. Not that they're never important in another piece of fiction, but in the romance fiction, that is all the money, because that's what you're matching. You're matching one personality with another.
Yeah, in my novel Shadows of the Sentinel, that really is a romance. The protagonist falls in love with a woman that he meets, who is no ordinary woman, and the romance associated in that had a lot of complications, and that's when romance can be really fun, is if you find the challenges associated with the romance. It's there is so many cliches out there about the monkey wrenches that get in the way of a romance, an overheard phone conversation that only hearing one side of it, they didn't really understand what was happening. We are getting way back into Hallmark territory.
Yes.
Yeah.
And,
or he's planning.
So be careful if you're gonna really write serious romance into your novels. Kind of know what the cliches and the tropes are associated with them, because there's a metric ton of tropes with romance.
He's planning the birthday with the sister, and the sister and the husband are hanging out all the time, but the wife does not know that that's what they're doing, planning her birthday party.
Yes, I saw that movie too.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm going to make the point that I often make, when I'm talking on this subject, the difference between erotica and romance. I'm going to make the point. I know you've heard it before. I'm going to say it again because I find it to be so interesting. The difference between erotica and romance will surprise you, because I've learned and read that the end goal for romance is sex, and the end goal for erotica is relationship. And so it's flipped around. You would think it'd be the other way, right? I'm reading an erotica, so the climax and the end goal must be sex. No, it starts out that way, and then the characters kind of figure out they actually like each other and can be friends, and then vice versa. The sexual tension in romance is always because they're not having relations. They're always this close to kissing, and then the alarm goes off or something, right? That's romance. Whereas
Exactly.
erotica is they're already getting busy in the first chapter. We need to figure out who the hell is this person and is he interesting or is she interesting? You know, what's the other conflict here? I find that to be very fascinating. I don't mean to veer us back into R-rated topics, but I think that's really interesting.
I guess I shouldn't toss in terms like reverse harem on you then.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Well, you know how many guys
there's a
is she
lot of
married to?
those. There's a lot of those like reverse harem and stuff that are really not romance at all.
No.
That's more like setting.
Yeah.
And, I've read lots of those too. My wife enjoys those for some reason.
I guess where I'm going to come from, for me, I don't want to write a straight-on romance, but I want to write stories where life events happen to my characters and to my sub-character, my secondary characters. And some of those things might be romance. Some of those things might be, a divorce. I'd like to see that portrayed in the story.
Yeah, divorce is fun.
You know, and in fact, romance actually has a long history in the science fiction field. Now, science fiction has changed a bit over the years, but one of the early science fiction writers was Edgar Rice Burroughs. Tarzan, Mars, Venus, At the Earth's Core. Every single book he wrote was a romance.
Yeah.
In fact, I think they coined the term planetary romance for science fiction stories that were like that.
Yeah.
So I want to write some science fiction stories that are fairly realistic, action-oriented, but that include romance. People you care about experiencing life events while they're having adventures.
Yeah, one other thing I'll add to your note, Shay, is that I like to write them with a slow burn, a sizzle. The heat turning up and boiling that frog really slowly, and to the end to build up.
I will say, I mean, not that it's romance, because it's not. But one thing that I really liked in a story I wrote called The Twilight Wanderer, I had my protagonist as a woman, and she had met this guy, but she just thought of him as a friend. And then she had this crush on this prince.
Oh no, the friend zone. The friend zone. A terrible place to be.
Yeah, she put the prince in. She put her.
That's the exact opposite of romance.
Yeah, no, I know, and she had
less romantic than that.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, and then she finally got the prince who she did want in the end, and she didn't want the prince anymore.
Well, actually, that's a good jumping point, Jeffrey. Let's also talk about romance where it's actually just like unrequited love, you know, or things that really just don't work out or is doomed from the start. Those are really interesting too. It doesn't have to be something that really ends with a relationship or even begins with a relationship.
Well, that was part of the point, that the prince had feelings for her. So in the end, it flipped the whole thing on its head.
Yeah.
I mean,
and as you switch it up, you can actually use romance as a tool, and you can crank unrequited love up to the point of tragedy, really.
Yeah.
And if you want to use that as a sledgehammer in your book, that's a good way to get somebody right in the gut.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but I will say that you know, there are certain, you know, formulas in terms of how a meet cute would work, in terms of where their first fight is going to be, where their second fight is going to be, how would the fights escalate, how the fights just end up with them kissing, you know.
I think maybe we should save for another episode, like the actual mechanics of writing and crafting love scenes, and you know, or
well, yes, how to write a love scene.
I think it might fill up a whole episode.
Actually, they're very difficult to write, so that would be a good topic.
All right, so we'll save that for another episode. But I would just leave a little, you know, hint that you have to keep in mind when you're writing, especially YA, which is something that I learned, is that be very careful that both of your characters are 18. That's the magic number. You can't have even if, you know, the male is 18 and the female is 17. That's no
Nope.
in
Nope,
YA.
nope.
So in real life too. But just because of legalities, and just be on the safe side too when you're writing YA.
Well, I mean, in that sense, they can still be fond of each other. They can have puppy love. They can hold hands.
I totally
Maybe they
think
can
in real
kiss,
life that's
but they
a
can't
really
go, they just can't go any farther than that.
I
realistic
guess
law.
I should mention the ages of the sisters in Pride and Prejudice then.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, no kidding.
I know.
Who are all out in society. Even the youngest is not yet 16.
Hmm. Yeah, well, different time, Victorian times.
Yeah. So we'll do another episode on actually crafting romance, but I think this was interesting to just talk about like our first impressions of it, because it is such a big topic and such a prevalent and important one when you're developing your repertoire, right?
Yeah. And I've read romance. I've read at least romance brought through writing groups, and I do have a friend who writes romance. And we will be frank. You want to make money as a writer, you write romance.
Yeah, that's very lucrative.
Right, it is the #1 big money maker for people that shop on Amazon with one click.
Mm-hmm.
Romance is #1. Sci-fi #2.
Mm-hmm. And there you and me.
Sorry, I'm a sci-fi writer.
Yeah.
So do both. Do a sci-fi romance, and you'll be off the charts.
That's right.
But everyone.
That's my goal.
I'll do what I can.
Tina Kinetic.
Romantic sci-fi. And on that note, it's another good episode, guys. Thanks a lot.
Finally structured indeed.
Thanks for coming. We'll see you again next week. Ciao.